Anne Boleyn's life, brief yet breathtaking in its intensity, shaped the destiny of a kingdom and set in motion events that changed the course of history forever. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, is one of the most significant and controversial figures in English history. Her life and tragic death marked a turning point not only in the personal life of one of England's most famous monarchs but also in the course of English history, particularly in relation to the English Reformation. Anne's story is one of ambition, political maneuvering, religious change, and ultimately tragedy. She is remembered for her role in one of the most dramatic episodes of Tudor England, a period that reshaped the religious, social, and political landscape of the country. Anne was born around 1501, the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, an ambitious courtier, and Elizabeth Howard, part of one of England's most influential noble families. Raised in the courts of Europe, particularly in the Netherlands and France, Anne was exposed to a sophisticated world of culture, politics, and intellectual currents. She returned to England in the early 1520s, where she quickly gained favor in the court of Henry VIII. She became one of the most prominent ladies-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife. Her beauty, intelligence, and wit captured Henry's attention, and soon after, Anne became the center of one of the most famous love stories in English history. Anne's relationship with Henry VIII would change the course of England's religious future. Henry, who was at the time desperate for a male heir, had been married to Catherine of Aragon for over 2 decades without producing a surviving son. Faced with the possibility that his marriage to Catherine was cursed because she had previously been married to his brother, Henry sought an annulment from the Pope, which would allow him to marry Anne. However, when the Pope refused to grant the annulment, Henry took matters into his own hands. Anne's refusal to become Henry's mistress, as well as her insistence on marriage, played a crucial role in the king's decision to break with the Catholic Church. Henry's actions eventually led to the English Reformation, a series of events that saw England sever its ties with the papacy, leading to the establishment of the Church of England with the king as its supreme head. The political and religious ramifications of Anne's marriage to Henry were immense. When Henry married Anne in 1533, it was not only a personal affair but also a highly political one. The marriage was a direct challenge to the authority of the Catholic Church. Anne's influence helped propel Henry further down the path of religious reform, which would ultimately lead to the dissolution of the monasteries and the solidification of Protestantism in England. Anne supported the Protestant cause, and her influence at court allowed her to protect and promote Protestant ideas. She was a patron of reformers such as Thomas Cranmer and Thomas Cromwell, who were key figures in Henry's break from Rome. Her marriage to Henry was a major catalyst in the creation of a separate and distinct English church. Anne's connection to Henry VIII was not just political but personal as well. She played a pivotal role in his emotional and personal life. Her refusal to be his mistress, demanding marriage before yielding to his advances, challenged Henry's expectations and ultimately helped him reshape the monarchy. She became his obsession, and her refusal to give in to him until marriage was part of the allure that made her so captivating. Their relationship became a driving force in Henry's decision to break from the Catholic Church, and it was Anne's insistence on being made queen that played a critical role in the subsequent chain of events. The marriage to Anne also had a profound effect on the monarchy's future. The birth of Elizabeth I in 1533 was seen as a triumph, but it was a female child, not the male heir Henry desperately wanted. This disappointment in the gender of their child put a strain on the marriage, and Henry's affections began to wane. His desire for a male heir would remain the central focus of his reign, and Anne's inability to deliver this heir ultimately led to her downfall. Within just 3 years of their marriage, Anne was accused of adultery, incest, and treason, charges that many historians now believe were fabricated to remove her from power. On May 19, 1536, Anne was executed by beheading at the Tower of London, a dramatic and tragic end to what had been a meteoric rise to power. Despite her relatively brief reign as queen, Anne's influence on English history is undeniable. Her daughter, Elizabeth, would go on to become one of the most successful and revered monarchs in English history. Elizabeth's reign marked the height of the English Renaissance, a period of great cultural and political achievements, including the defeat of the Spanish Armada and the establishment of England as a major European power. The religious reforms set in motion by Anne's marriage to Henry were solidified under Elizabeth's rule, ensuring the Protestant faith would become dominant in England. Anne's legacy is, therefore, intricately tied to that of her daughter, and her role in shaping England's religious identity cannot be overstated. The English Reformation, of which Anne played a significant part, was not just a religious upheaval, but also a political one. By breaking with the Pope and establishing the Church of England, Henry VIII asserted his authority over both church and state. This had long-lasting consequences for England, including the centralization of power in the monarchy and the creation of a religious identity that would define the nation for centuries. Anne Boleyn, in her role as queen and as the catalyst for Henry's break with Rome, played a crucial part in this transformation. While her personal life was marked by scandal, tragedy, and betrayal, her political and religious influence was transformative. Her story is intertwined with the birth of Protestantism in England, and her legacy continues to be felt in the religious and political fabric of the nation. In sum, Anne Boleyn's historical significance lies not only in her tumultuous relationship with Henry VIII but also in her lasting impact on the course of English history. Through her marriage to Henry, she played a central role in the English Reformation, which altered the religious landscape of England and set the stage for the rise of Protestantism. Despite her tragic end, Anne's legacy lived on through her daughter, Elizabeth, who would shape England into one of the world's leading powers. Anne Boleyn's story is one of political intrigue, religious upheaval, and personal tragedy, making her one of the most fascinating figures in English history. Anne Boleyn, born around 1501, remains one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in English history. Her life and legacy are intertwined with the reign of Henry VIII, but to understand the complexity of her rise to power and her pivotal role in shaping English history, it is important to first examine her early life, family background, education, and experiences in the Tudor court. Anne was born into the Boleyn family, which was well established in the English aristocracy. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was a diplomat and a courtier at the Tudor court. He held several important positions throughout his life, including that of ambassador to the Netherlands and France. Thomas was a skilled and ambitious man, which allowed him to rise through the ranks of the court. He was also highly connected, particularly to those in power. His influence would play a significant role in Anne's early life and later her rise at court. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, came from another prominent English family, the Howards, one of the most powerful and prestigious noble families of the time. Elizabeth was the daughter of Thomas Howard, 2nd Duke of Norfolk, and Margaret Mowbray. The Howard family's status and their political influence at court were significant, and Anne inherited much of her maternal family's strength. The combination of her paternal and maternal lineages gave Anne a strong foundation in the world of English nobility and a deep connection to the power structures of the time. Anne's family background meant that she was born into a world of privilege, but it was also one full of expectations. The Boleyns, though not at the very top of the social hierarchy, were a respected and ambitious family, striving to attain even greater positions within the Tudor court. The Boleyns' ambitions were tied to their understanding that the favor of the king could shape their futures. This ambition and close ties to the Tudor court would have a profound effect on Anne's upbringing and later aspirations. Anne's early life was likely spent at the family's estate, Hever Castle in Kent. Hever was a relatively modest property compared to the grander castles of the English elite, but it provided a secure and beautiful setting for Anne's formative years. It is believed that she had a happy childhood in the peaceful surroundings of Hever, but her family's ambitions meant that she was also groomed for a life at court from a very early age. From a young age, Anne was made aware of her status and the importance of securing a favorable marriage that could elevate her family's standing. These lessons would have a profound impact on Anne's later decisions in life, especially her ambitions to marry a man of power and influence, which ultimately led her to Henry VIII. Education was a crucial element of Anne's upbringing. As was the case for many young women of noble birth, Anne's education was tailored to prepare her for a life at court. She was highly educated in languages, music, and manners, which were all essential skills for a noblewoman. However, Anne's education was not just a means of personal development, it was also a means of enhancing her family's social standing. Anne's tutors were among the best of the time, and she was trained to be refined, elegant, and intellectual, ensuring she would be a suitable match for a man of high rank. The most significant period of Anne's education occurred when she was sent abroad as a young girl. Around the age of 12, Anne was sent to the Netherlands, where she received an education at the court of Margaret of Savoy, the regent of the Netherlands. There, Anne was exposed to the European Renaissance, an intellectual movement that would shape her worldview and later play a role in her political and religious ideas. The influence of the intellectual climate of Europe was significant in shaping Anne's character. She was introduced to humanist ideals, which emphasized the importance of reason, learning, and individual dignity. These ideas, which were emerging across Europe, would resonate with Anne's later promotion of the Protestant cause and her desire to bring reform to the English monarchy. Following her time in the Netherlands, Anne spent several years in France. She arrived at the French court in 1514, where she was educated in the customs of the French nobility and became familiar with the cultural and political dynamics of the French court. France, under the rule of King Francis I, was a center of Renaissance culture and intellectual life, which would further shape Anne's outlook on life and politics. During her time in France, Anne became fluent in French, and she became acquainted with several prominent figures at the French court. It was here that Anne's charm and beauty began to attract attention, and her social circle began to widen. Anne's time in France was significant not only for the exposure to Renaissance humanism and culture but also because it allowed her to gain experience in the highly sophisticated world of European courts. She was introduced to the complex dynamics of court life, where she observed the intricacies of political alliances, favors, and rivalries. These observations would serve her well when she returned to England and entered the service of Queen Catherine of Aragon at the English court. The French court was also a center of political and diplomatic activity, which gave Anne first-hand knowledge of diplomacy and international politics. This experience was crucial when she later found herself in the midst of the political machinations at Henry VIII's court. Upon returning to England in the early 1520s, Anne quickly entered the service of Queen Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. This marked Anne's formal entry into the Tudor court, where her life would change forever. As a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, Anne was positioned within the court's inner circle and soon found herself at the heart of Tudor politics. At this time, Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine was becoming increasingly strained due to her inability to provide him with a male heir. This set the stage for Anne's future relationship with Henry and her eventual rise to power. During her early years at the Tudor court, Anne became acquainted with key figures, including Thomas Wolsey, the Archbishop of York and chief advisor to Henry VIII. Wolsey played a crucial role in the early stages of Henry's desire for a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, which was the catalyst for Anne's rise to prominence. Anne, who had already begun to attract Henry's attention, was poised to become a central figure in the king's life. Their early interactions were marked by flirtation and intellectual engagement. Anne, well-versed in the European humanist ideals, became a significant influence on Henry, who was increasingly disillusioned with the Catholic Church and its refusal to annul his marriage to Catherine. Anne's rise at the court was not without its challenges. She was a woman in a male-dominated world, and her success at court was dependent on her ability to navigate the complex and often treacherous political terrain. Yet Anne's intelligence, charm, and ambition set her apart from other women at court. Her ability to gain the favor of powerful men, including Henry, and to use her charm to influence their decisions, made her a formidable presence at the Tudor court. As Anne's relationship with Henry deepened, her ambition to become queen grew stronger, and she began to distance herself from Catherine's court, aligning herself more closely with those who supported Henry's desire for a divorce. Anne's early life, with its European influences, her education, and her experiences at the Tudor court, laid the foundation for her later success and her eventual role as the second wife of Henry VIII. Her family background, education, and early interactions with key figures at court gave her the tools she needed to rise in the world of Tudor politics. The time she spent in the Netherlands and France, coupled with her education at Hever Castle and her time at the English court, equipped her with the skills, intellect, and ambition to navigate the complex world of the Tudor court and to secure her position as one of its most influential figures. Her rise from a young girl in a noble family to the second wife of one of England's most powerful kings is a testament to her determination and the impact that early influences had on her life. Anne Boleyn's return to England in the early 1520s marked the beginning of one of the most dramatic and influential stories in English history. After spending a significant portion of her formative years at the courts of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands and later in the sophisticated court of Queen Claude of France, and had been exposed to the very best of Renaissance culture, art, and learning, she returned to England as a young woman who was far more polished, worldly, and self-assured than most of her contemporaries. She was armed not only with continental elegance but with a keen political mind and an astute understanding of the power dynamics that governed court life. Upon her arrival, Anne took up a position as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife. It was here that her story would begin to intertwine fatefully with that of the king. Anne's presence at court did not go unnoticed for long. Her sharp wit, engaging conversation, and striking appearance set her apart from other ladies. Although contemporary descriptions of Anne varied, some praised her dark eyes and expressive face, while others noted that she was not traditionally beautiful. There was a universal acknowledgement of her magnetic charm. She quickly gained admirers among the courtiers, but it was Henry VIII himself who soon fell under her spell. At first, Anne's role at court appeared no different from that of any other noblewoman seeking favor and advancement. Yet, her time in France had taught her how to navigate the complexities of courtly love and intrigue, lessons that would soon become vital as she caught the king's eye. The seeds of Anne's rise were sown during a period when Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was growing increasingly strained. Catherine, once admired for her beauty and virtue, had aged and suffered repeated miscarriages and stillbirths. Most critically, she had failed to provide Henry with a surviving male heir, which to Henry was a serious dynastic crisis. The Tudor dynasty was still relatively new, having come to power in 1485 after years of civil war, and securing a male heir was essential to ensuring the stability of the kingdom. As Henry's dissatisfaction with his marriage grew, he became more susceptible to the allure of other women at court. Anne Boleyn, with her vivacity and intelligence, presented a captivating alternative to his aging queen. Initially, Henry's interest in and took the form of courtly flirtation, a common practice in Renaissance courts where married men openly praised and courted women as part of an elaborate game of chivalry. However, it soon became apparent that Henry's feelings for Anne were not merely playful. He was genuinely enamored. Yet Anne, unlike many other women who might have been tempted by the king's attention, refused to become his mistress. She had witnessed firsthand the fate of her sister, Mary Boleyn, who had earlier been Henry's lover and was cast aside after a brief affair, and was determined not to be used and discarded in the same way. Whether motivated by personal ambition, a strong sense of virtue, or a combination of both, and made it clear that she would not yield to Henry unless he made her his wife. This refusal only deepened Henry's obsession. Used to getting what he wanted, Henry found Anne's resistance both frustrating and tantalizing. He began to bombard her with love letters, something rare for a king to do, expressing his passion and pleading for her affection. Anne meanwhile played a delicate and dangerous game. She encouraged Henry's pursuit without surrendering, thus maintaining her power and increasing her value in his eyes. It was during this period that Henry made the momentous decision to seek an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, setting in motion a series of events that would change the course of English history. The political and religious context of the time cannot be overlooked when considering Anne's rise to power. Europe was a continent in turmoil, with the Protestant Reformation challenging the authority of the Catholic Church. Martin Luther's theses, nailed to the church door in Wittenberg in 1517, had begun a religious revolution that questioned the very foundations of papal authority. In England, however, the Reformation had not yet taken hold in the same way. Henry VIII had even been declared defender of the faith by the Pope for his writings against Lutheran doctrines. Nevertheless, the king's personal desires soon pushed him toward a break with Rome. Henry's request for an annulment was based on the argument that his marriage to Catherine was invalid because she had previously been married to his brother, Arthur. Although Catherine insisted that her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, thus making her union with Henry lawful, Henry claimed otherwise. He sought a papal dispensation to annul the marriage, but the situation was complicated by the political realities of the time. Catherine's nephew was none other than Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and one of the most powerful rulers in Europe. The Pope, caught between Henry's demands and the Emperor's influence, stalled for years, refusing to grant the annulment. During this period of limbo, Anne Boleyn's influence over Henry grew stronger. Far from being a passive participant, Anne actively encouraged Henry's efforts to free himself from Catherine. She introduced him to reformist ideas and scholars who questioned papal authority, such as William Tyndale and other Englishmen who were sympathetic to Protestant doctrines. Although Anne herself never fully embraced Protestantism, she remained personally devout and attached to certain traditional practices. She recognized that the religious reform movement could be politically useful in breaking the stalemate with Rome. Anne's political acumen became increasingly apparent. She understood that her position remained precarious as long as Henry remained married to Catherine. Therefore, she threw her support behind advisors and clerics who advocated for the king's supremacy over the church in England. One of the most important figures in this regard was Thomas Cranmer, who would eventually become Archbishop of Canterbury and a key architect of the English Reformation. Cranmer's arguments that the king had the authority to annul his marriage without papal approval were music to Henry's ears and bolstered his resolve to act independently. As the battle over the annulment dragged on, Anne's relationship with Henry deepened, but their physical relationship remained chaste until marriage, at least according to most accounts. Anne's patience, however, was wearing thin, and she recognized that she needed to secure her position permanently. By 1532, Henry had taken decisive steps toward breaking with Rome. He had dismissed Cardinal Wolsey, the Lord Chancellor who had failed to secure the annulment, and had begun asserting his authority over the English Church. In that year, Anne accompanied Henry to Calais for a diplomatic meeting with Francis I of France, signaling her elevated status and hinting at the inevitability of her becoming queen. Shortly after their return to England, Anne and Henry secretly married, likely in January 1533. Whether their marriage preceded her pregnancy or was hastily arranged upon discovering it remains a matter of historical debate. In any case, Anne's coronation as Queen of England took place in June 1533 in a lavish ceremony at Westminster Abbey. The break with Rome was now complete. In March 1533, the newly appointed Archbishop Cranmer had declared Henry's marriage to Catherine void and his marriage to Anne valid. In response, Pope Clement VII excommunicated Henry, formally severing England from the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. Anne's rise to power had been astonishing. From the daughter of a relatively minor noble family, she had become the Queen of England, the catalyst for the English Reformation, and the mother of the future Elizabeth I. Yet, her triumph carried the seeds of her eventual downfall. The same intelligence, independence, and ambition that had attracted Henry would later become liabilities in a court that expected its queen to be obedient and deferential. Moreover, Anne's position remained insecure until she could produce a male heir, the great prize that had eluded Catherine and which Henry still desperately desired. In September 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. While the child would grow to become one of England's greatest monarchs, her arrival was a profound disappointment to Henry. Nonetheless, at the time, Henry expressed hope that sons would follow. Anne's influence at court remained strong for the time being. She wielded significant power, distributing favors and patronage to her supporters, promoting religious reform, and engaging in the political life of the realm. Her enemies, however, were numerous and growing in strength, resentful of her arrogance and the abruptness with which she had supplanted Catherine. Thus, Anne's rise to power, though dazzling, was fraught with peril. She had achieved what few could have imagined possible, but in doing so she had made powerful enemies both at home and abroad. Her story, from her return to England through her romance with Henry VIII and the epoch-making religious changes that accompanied it, is one of ambition, intelligence, and political savvy. Yet, it also stands as a cautionary tale of how quickly fortune could change in the treacherous world of Tudor politics. After years of a delicate and often tumultuous courtship, Anne Boleyn and King Henry VIII found themselves bound by a love so potent and political that it altered the very course of English history. Anne, once a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, had risen to unprecedented heights of influence. Her intelligence, wit, and undeniable charm captivated Henry, who had grown weary of his marriage to Catherine, especially as she failed to produce a surviving male heir. 4 years, Henry pursued Anne with relentless determination, showering her with letters, gifts, and promises of grandeur. Yet, Anne remained firm in her refusals to become his mistress, insisting on marriage, a stance that only deepened Henry's obsession. The courtship was not a private affair. Courtiers whispered about Anne's influence, and foreign ambassadors reported back to their sovereigns about the king's infatuation. Still, Anne held firm, leveraging her desirability to secure not just affection but a crown. Her refusal to capitulate without the offer of marriage was a bold move in an age when kings were not often denied, and it showcased her keen understanding of the political power of marriage. By 1533, the years of political maneuvering, theological debates, and Henry's desperate petitions to Rome had culminated in a decisive break from the Catholic Church. The creation of the Church of England was as much a product of Henry's desire to marry and as it was of his yearning for ecclesiastical autonomy. In January of that year, Anne and Henry married in secret. The ceremony was conducted by a compliant clergyman, likely officiated in a private setting away from the prying eyes of the court. At the time of their clandestine marriage, Anne was already pregnant, a fact that necessitated the union be formalized quickly. The secret marriage marked a seismic shift in English political and religious life. No longer beholden to papal authority, Henry was free to declare his first marriage null and void, and to elevate Anne to the status of queen consort. Yet, the secrecy surrounding their union was not merely a precaution against public outcry, it was a strategic move. Henry needed time to ensure that his new marriage would be recognized not just by the court, but by the broader fabric of English society. In June 1533, Anne Boleyn was officially crowned Queen of England in a lavish ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Her coronation was unprecedented, a magnificent display intended to legitimize her position and the unborn child she carried. Unlike previous queens, Anne was crowned with the crown of St. Edward, a crown traditionally reserved for reigning monarchs. This choice was symbolic, signaling not just her queenly status but also the high hopes invested in the child she would bear. The ceremony itself was a spectacle of unparalleled grandeur, and was anointed and crowned in a dazzling procession that wound its way through London, with pageants and tableaux celebrating her ascent. The streets were lined with cheering crowds, although not all the voices were genuinely supportive. Many still held loyalty to Catherine of Aragon. Nevertheless, the public pageantry served to cement Anne's place in the national consciousness. As queen, Anne Boleyn wielded significant influence at court. Her appointment of loyal supporters to key positions shifted the dynamics of power, unsettling established nobility and creating new factions, and was deeply involved in patronage, education, and religious reform. She championed scholars who were aligned with the burgeoning Protestant movement and advocated for the translation of the Bible into English. Her role extended beyond mere ceremonial duties. She was an active political player, using her position to reshape the English monarchy according to her and Henry's vision. Anne's sharp intellect and keen political instincts allowed her to navigate the treacherous waters of court intrigue, at least initially. She encouraged Henry's assertion of royal supremacy over the church and supported the dissolution of monasteries, actions that had profound consequences for English society. However, her assertive nature and reformist views earned her powerful enemies. Many traditionalists viewed her as a usurper and blamed her for the religious upheaval that followed the break from Rome. The stakes of Anne's queenship were raised immeasurably with her pregnancy. The nation eagerly anticipated the birth of a male heir, which would secure the Tudor dynasty and validate Henry's controversial marriage. The pressure on Anne was immense. Her every move was scrutinized, and her health during pregnancy was a matter of public concern and private speculation. On September 7, 1533, Anne gave birth not to the longed-for son but to a daughter, Elizabeth. The news was a disappointment to Henry and to many at court. Nevertheless, the child was healthy, and Henry took steps to ensure her legitimacy and future prospects. Elizabeth was proclaimed Princess of England, and preparations for her upbringing were made with meticulous care. Elizabeth's birth carried significant political and personal ramifications. While a male heir would have immediately solidified Henry's new lineage, Elizabeth's arrival did not diminish Anne's standing overnight. Initially, there was hope that more children, particularly sons, would follow. Anne retained her influence and continued to act as a powerful consort, but the failure to produce a male heir cast a long shadow over her position. Moreover, Elizabeth's birth forced England to confront the possibility of a female monarch, a concept that challenged entrenched patriarchal norms. Although it would be many years before Elizabeth ascended the throne, her birth marked the beginning of a transformative era. Anne was aware of the importance of her daughter and took pride in Elizabeth's intelligence and promise from an early age. Despite the initial celebrations, the pressure on Anne only intensified after Elizabeth's birth. The court's tolerance for Anne's assertive personality began to wane, and factions loyal to Catherine of Aragon or skeptical of Anne's legitimacy plotted against her. Henry's eye also began to wander, and the absence of a male heir gave rise to doubts about the validity of his marriage to Anne. Nonetheless, for a brief period, Anne Boleyn stood at the zenith of power, a queen whose marriage had reshaped the political and religious landscape of England. Her story, intimately tied to the fortunes of the infant Elizabeth, was a testament to both her ambition and the perilous nature of Tudor court life. The union of Anne and Henry was not merely a personal relationship. It was a catalyst for revolution, setting into motion events that would define the destiny of England for generations to come. In private moments, Anne likely reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken her from the English countryside to the pinnacle of power. She had gambled everything on Henry's love and the promise of a crown, and for a time she had succeeded beyond the wildest expectations. Yet, the precariousness of her position was always apparent, a reality that became more acute as the years went by without the birth of a male heir. Her coronation and the birth of Elizabeth were triumphs, but they also sowed the seeds of future conflicts. Anne's reformist influence at court threatened the old order, and her inability to produce a son made her vulnerable to the shifting allegiances of the nobility. Every political misstep, every miscarriage, every perceived slight was magnified under the intense scrutiny of Henry's court. Anne's rise was a marvel, her reign a revolution, and her fall, though still in the future, was already being whispered about in shadowed corners of palaces and chapels. For now, however, she stood as Queen of England, mother to the future Elizabeth I, and the woman who had changed the course of history through the force of her will, her intelligence, and her indomitable spirit. The story of Anne and Henry's marriage, secret and sacred, the pomp of Anne's coronation and the bittersweet joy of Elizabeth's birth together form one of the most riveting chapters in English history, a story of love and ambition, of triumph and looming tragedy, played out against the grand stage of a nation on the cusp of monumental change. Despite the initial celebrations, the pressure on and only intensified. The court, the nobility, and indeed much of Europe awaited news of another pregnancy, one that might deliver the longed-for male heir. And knew her position depended precariously on her ability to secure the Tudor succession through sons. In the early years of her marriage she conceived several more times, but each ended tragically in miscarriage or stillbirth. These personal losses devastated Anne and strained her relationship with Henry, who was growing increasingly frustrated and disillusioned. The political landscape grew ever more treacherous. Anne's enemies at court, many loyal to Catherine of Aragon or simply resentful of Anne's influence, whispered against her. They portrayed her as an ambitious seductress who had bewitched the king and brought instability to the realm. Foreign powers, especially Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, regarded her as an illegitimate queen, and their ambassadors refused to acknowledge her status. This international pressure, combined with Anne's inability to produce a male heir, sowed doubt in Henry's mind about the righteousness of their union. Anne, however, did not capitulate. She continued to assert herself as queen, engaging in matters of state, championing educational and religious reform, and surrounding herself with a circle of loyalists who shared her vision for England. Her charisma, wit, and cultural patronage endeared her to many, particularly among the younger courtiers and scholars. Yet, her political assertiveness, rare for a queen consort, made her a polarizing figure. Friends and foes alike recognized that Anne was no passive ornament of the court but a woman of formidable will and ambition. By late 1535, tensions reached a breaking point. Henry's eye had begun to wander, and a young noblewoman, Jane Seymour, caught his attention. Jane's quiet demeanor and traditional values starkly contrasted with Anne's fiery spirit, appealing to a king who now yearned for peace and stability. As Henry's affections shifted, and found herself increasingly isolated, her former allies deserting her, and her enemies growing bolder. The final blow came in May 1536, when Anne was arrested on charges of adultery, incest, and high treason. The accusations were almost certainly fabricated, orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, who had once been Anne's ally but now saw her as an obstacle, and faced her trial with courage and dignity, but the outcome was preordained. She was found guilty and condemned to death. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed by sword at the Tower of London. She met her end with remarkable composure, leaving behind a legacy far greater than anyone at the time could have foreseen. Although she had failed to produce a male heir, the daughter she bore, Elizabeth, would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs, reshaping the nation's destiny and securing the very legacy for which Anne had sacrificed so much. Anne Boleyn's life and marriage to Henry VIII changed the course of English history forever. Through her ambition, intelligence, and courage, she played a central role in the English Reformation, the creation of the Church of England, and the birth of an era that would eventually see England emerge as a major European power. Her story remains a poignant reminder of the volatile intersection of love, power, and politics in the royal courts of the Renaissance. The marriage between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, once marked by intense passion and political upheaval, soon began to show signs of strain. Henry, who had risked everything to make Anne his wife, now found himself increasingly dissatisfied. The very qualities that had once enchanted him, her fiery spirit, sharp intellect, and refusal to submit easily, began to irritate him as the burdens of kingship and personal expectation mounted. Anne, for her part, had entered into the marriage with high hopes but found the pressures of queenship, constant scrutiny, and the need to produce a male heir overwhelming. Their union, built on defiance of tradition, was quickly becoming a battlefield of personal disappointments and political challenges. At the heart of the growing tension was Anne's inability to provide Henry with the son he so desperately desired. In a world where royal succession depended heavily on male lineage, Anne's failure to bear a living male child was not merely a private sorrow but a public calamity. The birth of their daughter, Elizabeth, had initially been met with a mixture of celebration and muted disappointment, but Anne's subsequent miscarriages deepened the king's despair. Each lost child represented not just a personal grief but a political vulnerability. The Tudor dynasty, still relatively new and not firmly established, required a strong male heir to secure its future and prevent civil strife. Anne's repeated failures in this regard undermined her position at court and in Henry's affections. As Henry's disenchantment grew, so did his tendency toward infidelity. While married to Catherine of Aragon, Henry's affairs had been discreet and largely tolerated. With Anne, however, the stakes were different. Having defied the Catholic Church and reshaped England's religious landscape to marry her, Henry expected nothing less than divine affirmation of his choice. The absence of a son seemed to him a sign of divine disapproval. Increasingly, he sought comfort elsewhere, surrounding himself with young, attractive women who offered the possibility of uncomplicated pleasure. Among these women, Jane Seymour soon emerged as a figure of particular interest. Jane Seymour, a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne, presented a stark contrast to her mistress. Where Anne was fiery, witty, and outspoken, Jane was demure, obedient, and soft-spoken. Henry, weary of Anne's assertiveness and embittered by the lack of a male heir, found Jane's quiet demeanor refreshing. Their flirtations grew increasingly public, a humiliation that Anne could scarcely bear. Though Anne remained queen, she sensed her position slipping away. Her relationship with Henry, once marked by an exhilarating conspiracy against the world, had curdled into mistrust, resentment, and quiet despair. Despite the personal strains, Anne continued to play a significant role in the political life of the court. Her influence over Henry was undeniable, even as it waned in matters of the heart. Anne had strong views on religion, favoring the spread of Protestant ideas and the reformation of the English Church. She used her position to promote the careers of reform-minded clerics and scholars, many of whom were grateful for her patronage and protection. Figures like Thomas Cranmer, who would later become Archbishop of Canterbury, owed much of their advancement to Anne's support. Anne's patronage extended beyond religious figures to include artists, writers, and humanists. She helped foster a vibrant cultural environment at court, one that embraced learning, innovation, and the arts. Her influence ensured that the English Renaissance continued to flourish, even as the country grappled with religious and political upheaval. Yet this very assertiveness, her readiness to champion causes and people, made Anne many enemies. Traditionalists viewed her with suspicion, seeing her as a disruptive force, a foreign-influenced upstart who threatened the established order. As Anne's political influence grew, so too did the opposition against her. Key figures at court, most notably Thomas Cromwell, began to see Anne as a liability. Cromwell, once an ally, found himself increasingly at odds with the Queen. While both had initially worked together to engineer Henry's break with Rome and the establishment of the Church of England, their visions for the future of the English state diverged sharply. Anne favored continued religious reform, the promotion of Protestantism, and a more radical restructuring of English society. Cromwell, pragmatic and cautious, sought to consolidate royal power and secure political stability, even if that meant slowing or halting further religious upheaval. Anne's opposition to Cromwell's policies, particularly concerning the distribution of wealth from the dissolution of the monasteries, brought them into open conflict. Anne favored using the proceeds for educational and charitable purposes, while Cromwell preferred to enrich the crown and reward loyal noblemen. Their quarrels became increasingly bitter, providing Cromwell with both motive and opportunity to plot her downfall. At the same time, the court was abuzz with intrigue. Many courtiers, sensing Henry's growing favor toward Jane Seymour, began to shift their allegiances. Where once they had vied for Anne's approval, they now sought to ingratiate themselves with Jane and her family. The Seymours, shrewdly aware of the winds of change, positioned themselves to take advantage of Anne's decline. Anne, isolated and increasingly desperate, found herself without the strong network of supporters she once commanded. Henry's own behavior signaled the depth of Anne's fall from favor. Once captivated by her every word and gesture, he now treated her with impatience and indifference. Public displays of affection ceased, replaced by cold formality. Their private interactions, once characterized by passion and playful banter, became tense and laden with unspoken accusations. Anne, whose quick wit and temper had once delighted Henry, now found that any expression of frustration or anger only pushed him further away. The rise of Jane Seymour as Anne's chief rival was perhaps the clearest sign that Anne's days as queen were numbered. Jane, coached by her ambitious family, played her part perfectly. She refused to become Henry's mistress, just as Anne had done years before, presenting herself as a model of virtue and piety. Henry, eager to believe in the promise of a fresh start and a legitimate male heir, was easily ensnared. By early 1536, he was openly discussing the possibility of ending his marriage to Anne. Anne's increasing isolation was not only political but also deeply personal. Former friends distanced themselves, either out of self-preservation or disillusionment. The miscarriage of a male child in January 1536 dealt a devastating blow to Anne's hopes. Henry interpreted the loss as a divine sign that their marriage was cursed. Public sympathy for Anne, never robust, dwindled further as rumors and gossip painted her as both schemer and harpy, undeserving of her crown. The atmosphere at court grew more hostile. Cromwell, sensing Henry's dissatisfaction, began to lay the groundwork for Anne's removal. He assembled evidence, real and fabricated, to accuse her of adultery, incest and treason, charges so serious that they would not only justify an annulment but also eliminate Anne as a political threat. Cromwell's meticulous planning ensured that when the moment came, Anne would have few defenders. Henry, eager to be free of a marriage that had brought him more frustration than fulfillment, offered little resistance to Cromwell's machinations. Whether he believed the charges or simply found them convenient is a matter historians still debate. What is clear is that Henry's desire for a son and a fresh start overpowered any lingering affection he might have had for Anne. In the final weeks of her life, Anne maintained her dignity and composure, though she must have known her situation was hopeless. Arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London, she faced her accusers with courage. Her trial, a foregone conclusion, condemned her to death. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed by a French swordsman, chosen by Henry as a supposed act of mercy. Anne's death marked not only the end of a turbulent marriage but also the culmination of a seismic shift in English history. Her brief queenship had set into motion events that would reverberate for generations: the break with Rome, the establishment of the Church of England, and the eventual rise of her daughter, Elizabeth I, to the throne. Though vilified in her lifetime, Anne's legacy would ultimately transcend her tragic end. In the years that followed, many would look back on Anne's life and wonder at the forces that had both elevated and destroyed her. She had been a woman of remarkable intellect, courage and ambition, qualities that both enthralled and threatened the men around her. Her failure to conform to the traditional expectations of womanhood, her insistence on asserting her influence in a male-dominated court, and her passionate nature made her a revolutionary figure, though one destined to pay the highest price for her defiance. Henry, for his part, moved swiftly to marry Jane Seymour, who would finally provide him with the long-sought male heir. Yet even as he achieved his goal, the scars of his actions lingered. The English court, once a place of glittering pageantry and vibrant intellectual life, became a more somber and cautious place. The lesson of Anne Boleyn, of how quickly favor could turn to ruin, was not lost on those who remained. Anne's story endures because it encapsulates the volatile mix of love, power, ambition, and betrayal that defined the Tudor era. Her rise and fall reveal the perils faced by women who dared to step beyond the narrow confines assigned to them. They also underscore the human cost of political ambition and the mercilessness of absolute power. In the end, Anne Boleyn's greatest legacy was not the crown she briefly wore but the daughter she bore, a daughter who would grow to embody many of Anne's finest qualities and to rule England with a strength and vision that changed the course of history. Anne Boleyn's fall from grace was as swift and brutal as her rise had been dazzling. In the early months of 1536, she was still the Queen of England, a figure of considerable influence and prestige. Yet beneath the surface, forces were gathering against her, forces determined to destroy her. Her failure to produce a male heir had made her position increasingly precarious, and her assertive personality, which had once captivated Henry VIII, had become a liability in a court riddled with ambition, intrigue, and betrayal. As Henry's affection waned and his eyes turned to the more docile Jane Seymour, and found herself increasingly isolated, her enemies emboldened to act. The conspiracy against Anne was carefully crafted, and its execution was a testament to the ruthless efficiency of Tudor politics. Chief among its architects was Thomas Cromwell, Henry's trusted minister. Once an ally of Anne in the religious and political upheavals that had reshaped England, Cromwell had come to see her as a threat. Anne's continued interference in political matters, her outspoken support of certain religious reformers, and her resistance to Cromwell's own policies regarding the redistribution of church wealth had made her an inconvenient obstacle. Moreover, Anne had no powerful family to shield her. Unlike Catherine of Aragon, whose nephew was the mighty Emperor Charles V, Anne's lineage offered little deterrence to those who wished her removed. The charges leveled against Anne were among the most shocking imaginable. She was accused not only of adultery but of incest and treason. These were crimes not merely against the king but against the very stability of the realm. Cromwell and his agents compiled a web of accusations, implicating a number of men at court, including Henry Norris, Sir Francis Weston, William Brereton, Mark Smeaton, and most scandalously her own brother, George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford. The accusations were constructed with alarming speed and little genuine evidence. Torture or the threat of torture, promises of leniency, and outright fabrication were used to extract confessions or testimonies. The political significance of the charges was immense. By painting Anne as a threat to the king and the kingdom, Cromwell could justify her removal with a veneer of legality and necessity. Anne's trial was a spectacle carefully staged to affirm the charges against her while maintaining the appearance of justice. She was arrested and taken to the Tower of London, the same place where she had once been triumphantly lodged before her coronation. Now, the walls that had echoed with celebration bore witness to her despair, and maintained her innocence with a dignified resolve that won her the sympathy of some but did little to alter her fate. The trial was held at the Tower on May 15, 1536, before a jury of her peers, many of whom owed their positions to Cromwell or harbored personal animosities against her. Despite the lack of credible evidence, Anne was found guilty. The trial was a foregone conclusion, its outcome determined by political necessity rather than truth. Anne's accusers, men she had known, perhaps even trusted, gave testimony against her. Mark Smeaton, a court musician, provided the only confession, likely extracted under duress. Others, such as Henry Norris, refused to confess even when offered the chance to save themselves. George Boleyn's inclusion in the charges was particularly vicious. The accusation of incest was designed to shock and alienate, to turn public opinion irrevocably against Anne. In the days between her sentencing and her execution, Anne remained at the Tower. Her composure during this period was remarkable. She spent much of her time in prayer and reflection. Though she must have known her death was inevitable, she retained a certain grace and dignity that has captivated historians and writers ever since. Reports suggest that she spoke openly with her attendants, sometimes with remarkable cheerfulness, sometimes with profound melancholy. She prepared herself spiritually for death, taking comfort in her faith. Requests were made to ensure that her execution would be swift and relatively merciful. A skilled swordsman was summoned from Calais, rather than the usual executioner with an axe, a rare concession that Henry authorized, perhaps as a final gesture of regard or merely a demonstration of his own magnanimity. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was led to the scaffold. The Tower Green was prepared for the event, and a small crowd gathered to witness the execution of the once glorious queen. Anne wore a simple dress of dark gray or black, and a cloak trimmed with fur. She ascended the scaffold with steady steps, accompanied by her ladies-in-waiting. Before her death, she addressed the crowd with a speech that has been recorded and revered for its poise and restraint. She did not proclaim her innocence nor accuse others. Instead, she spoke of her loyalty to the king, praised his virtues, and asked those present to pray for him and for her. The execution itself was swift. Anne knelt upright, a blindfold covering her eyes. The executioner, trained in the precise art of beheading with a sword, quickly and cleanly severed her head from her body. With that single stroke Anne's life ended, and her tumultuous story entered the realm of legend. The aftermath of Anne's death rippled through the court and the kingdom. Her body was hastily buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the Tower grounds. The same day Henry donned white robes and celebrated his engagement to Jane Seymour. Just days later they were married, and Jane would soon be carrying the hope of a male heir. Public reaction to Anne's execution was mixed. In some quarters, there was a sense of relief. Anne had been a divisive figure, and her death was seen by some as necessary for the stability of the realm. In others, there was a deep unease at the manner of her downfall. The swiftness of her fall, the flimsy nature of the charges, and the ruthlessness of the proceedings left a stain on Henry's reputation that could never be fully erased. Foreign ambassadors recorded the events with a mixture of fascination and horror. And, once hailed as the hope of reform and renewal, had become a cautionary tale about the perils of ambition, the caprice of power, and the vulnerability of those who rose too high. Henry's marriage to Jane Seymour seemed to confirm that Anne's destruction had been motivated not merely by political necessity but by personal desire. Jane was everything Anne was not: quiet, submissive, and seemingly uninterested in politics. She represented a return to traditional feminine virtues as they were understood at the time, and her ascent was seen as a corrective to the perceived excesses of Anne's reign. For Henry, the marriage was a fresh start, a chance to secure the male heir that had eluded him for so long. For the court, it was a reordering of alliances and loyalties, as those who had tied their fortunes to and now scrambled to distance themselves from her memory. Yet Anne's legacy could not be so easily erased. She had been a central figure in one of the most dramatic transformations in English history, the break from Rome and the establishment of the Church of England. Her influence on Henry's religious policies, though often mediated through others, had been profound. She had been a patron of reformers and scholars, a supporter of the spread of the English Bible, and a catalyst for change. Though her life ended in tragedy, her impact endured, shaping the course of English history for generations. In the months and years following her death, Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, would grow up under a cloud of suspicion and marginalization. Yet she would ultimately ascend the throne and become one of England's greatest monarchs. In Elizabeth's reign, the memory of Anne Boleyn would be subtly rehabilitated. The daughter of the disgraced queen would come to embody many of the same qualities, intelligence, determination, charisma, that had once made Anne so remarkable and so dangerous. The story of Anne Boleyn's fall remains one of the most compelling episodes in the history of the Tudor dynasty. It is a story of ambition and betrayal, of passion and cruelty, of a woman who dared to seek power in a world that could not tolerate such audacity. It is a story that has been told and retold, interpreted and reinterpreted, but at its core, it remains a testament to the human capacity for both greatness and tragedy. Thomas Cromwell's role in Anne's downfall highlights the brutal pragmatism of Tudor politics. He had once allied with her to achieve mutual goals, but when their interests diverged, he chose survival over loyalty. His orchestration of her fall was masterful in its cruelty, ensuring that Anne could not be martyred or emerge as a sympathetic figure. By accusing her of moral depravity and betrayal, Cromwell ensured that few would mourn her openly. The significance of the charges against Anne must be understood in the broader context of Tudor political culture. Accusations of sexual misconduct were a powerful tool for discrediting opponents, especially women. By framing Anne as not only unfaithful but criminally corrupt, her enemies rendered her politically toxic. Treason, adultery, incest, each charge was calculated to maximize outrage and minimize sympathy. Anne's conduct during her trial and execution left a powerful impression even among those who had orchestrated her demise. Her courage, dignity, and grace under unimaginable pressure demonstrated a strength of character that belied the accusations against her. In death as in life, Anne Boleyn defied easy categorization. She was neither wholly victim nor villain but a complex, extraordinary figure whose life and death reflected the dangerous, shifting currents of her time. The dramatic circumstances of her execution, the specially imported swordsman, the carefully managed public spectacle, also reveal much about the priorities and anxieties of Henry's court. Henry wanted Anne's death to be swift and relatively bloodless, not because he wished her well, but because he wished to avoid the spectacle of a botched execution that could provoke sympathy or scandal. Yet despite these efforts, the execution marked a turning point. Henry's later reign would be increasingly marked by paranoia, cruelty, and isolation. In the end, Anne's greatest revenge may have been that her bloodline endured. Her daughter Elizabeth not only survived but flourished, overcoming the stigma of her birth and her mother's disgrace to become a monarch of unparalleled achievement. Through Elizabeth, Anne's ambition, intelligence, and spirit found their fullest expression, reshaping England in ways that even Anne herself could scarcely have imagined. Anne Boleyn's fall is a story of a dazzling rise and a catastrophic downfall, of love turned to hatred, and of the perilous dance between power and vulnerability. It is a story that continues to captivate, a reminder of the costs of ambition, the cruelty of political machinations, and the enduring human fascination with those who dare to challenge the limits imposed upon them. Her life and death remain among the most poignant and enduring episodes of the Tudor era, a symbol of both the possibilities and the perils of reaching for greatness. The aftermath of Anne Boleyn's life and death would ripple across history in ways no one at the time could fully predict. Henry VIII, who had once been so passionately in love with and that he had turned the world upside down to marry her, moved swiftly after her execution. Within days, he became engaged to Jane Seymour, a lady-in-waiting to both Queen Catherine and Queen Anne. Their marriage represented more than a simple personal choice. It was a calculated political act meant to stabilize the monarchy and achieve the goal that had eluded him for years, the birth of a legitimate male heir. Henry's obsession with securing a male successor had been the driving force behind his break with Rome and the founding of the Church of England. Yet, ironically, the child he had with Anne, Elizabeth, would ultimately prove far more influential than any male heir he could have imagined. While Henry's later wives, including Jane Seymour and of Cleves, Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr, each played roles in his personal saga and the political tapestry of the Tudor court, none left a mark as profound as Anne. Through her daughter, Anne Boleyn would change the course of English history forever. Elizabeth Tudor, born in September 1533 under a cloud of disappointment because she was not the son Henry had desperately wanted, grew up to become one of the most formidable monarchs in English history. Her reign, which would later be known as the Elizabethan era, symbolized strength, cultural flourishing, and religious stabilization after decades of turmoil. Yet Elizabeth's claim to the throne was built on the fragile foundations of her mother's controversial marriage to Henry, and her path to power was anything but assured. Despite being declared illegitimate after Anne's fall, Elizabeth's intelligence, political savvy, and the legacy of her mother's ambition helped her navigate the dangerous waters of Tudor politics to ascend the throne in 1558. Anne's marriage to Henry, though tragically brief, had lasting effects on the Tudor dynasty itself. By severing ties with the Catholic Church to Mary and Henry inadvertently set into motion the English Reformation, a seismic shift in religious and political life that would define England's future. Anne's influence over Henry in religious matters is often understated, but historical evidence suggests she played a vital role in steering him towards reformist ideas. She championed the distribution of English translations of the Bible and promoted scholars and clerics sympathetic to Protestant ideals. Anne's advocacy for religious change was not merely political expedience. She held sincere reformist beliefs, viewing them as a means of purifying Christian worship from corruption and superstition. Her influence on Henry's religious policies was not without risk. In a world where religious orthodoxy was a pillar of legitimacy and political power, Anne's promotion of Protestant ideas made her powerful enemies. Traditionalists at court, particularly those loyal to Rome, viewed her as a dangerous radical. Her efforts to bring about religious reform not only contributed to her political downfall but also ensured her a place in history as one of the quiet architects of England's Protestant future. Anne's religious and political beliefs, though overshadowed by the sensationalism of her personal life and death, were significant. Her support of figures such as William Tyndale, whose translation of the Bible into English had been condemned by the Catholic Church, demonstrated a genuine commitment to making Scripture accessible to the people. Her patronage of reform-minded clerics, and her encouragement of Henry to question papal authority, laid critical groundwork for the eventual establishment of the Church of England as a separate entity from Rome. In this way, Anne's legacy reaches far beyond the courtroom drama of her trial or the tragic spectacle of her execution. It is woven into the very fabric of English religious and political life. As the years passed, the memory of Anne Boleyn became a contested space. During the reign of her daughter, Elizabeth I, Anne's image was carefully rehabilitated. Elizabeth had every incentive to restore the dignity of her mother's name, for in doing so, she strengthened her own legitimacy. Historians and poets of the Elizabethan period portrayed Anne as a virtuous queen wronged by political enemies, a woman whose only fault was to inspire envy and fear among those who could not match her wit, beauty, or influence. Yet outside the carefully curated image of the Elizabethan court, Anne continued to inspire conflicting emotions. In the centuries following her death, Anne Boleyn became a subject of fascination in literature, theater, and later, film. Her story, a compelling mix of ambition, romance, betrayal, and tragedy, proved irresistible to writers and artists. In plays, novels, and movies, Anne was variously portrayed as a scheming seductress, an innocent victim, a religious martyr, and a proto-feminist icon. This continual reshaping of Anne's image speaks to the enduring complexity of her character and the ambiguity of her historical legacy. She is a figure through whom every generation has sought to understand the dangers and possibilities of female power. The mythologizing of Anne Boleyn has had a profound cultural impact. As a tragic figure, she embodies the precariousness of life at the Tudor court, where favor could turn to fatal enmity in an instant. As a queen who defied expectations, she represents the challenge to patriarchal structures that women of ambition have faced throughout history. And as the mother of Elizabeth I, she is immortalized as the progenitor of one of England's most celebrated sovereigns. Elizabeth I's reign, lasting 45 years, cemented Anne's place in the pantheon of English historical figures. Elizabeth's leadership during a time of immense political, religious, and military upheaval demonstrated the strength and resilience that many historians trace back to her mother's legacy. The defeat of the Spanish Armada, the flourishing of English drama and literature under Shakespeare and Marlowe, the cautious balancing of Protestantism without alienating Catholic subjects. All these achievements of Elizabeth's reign reflected a mastery of political nuance and strategic brilliance that seemed almost inherited. Under Elizabeth, the Tudor dynasty reached its cultural and political zenith. Yet it is crucial to remember that Elizabeth ruled as the daughter of a woman condemned as a traitor and executed under charges of adultery, incest, and treason. That Elizabeth not only survived but thrived in such circumstances is a testament to her extraordinary capabilities, and a powerful testament to Anne Boleyn's enduring legacy. Had Anne not been queen, had she not fought and suffered for her marriage to Henry, had she not given birth to Elizabeth, the trajectory of English history would have been profoundly different. The religious landscape would likely have remained tethered to Rome far longer. The cultural renaissance of the Elizabethan age might never have come to pass. England's identity as a Protestant nation, resistant to foreign domination, might never have solidified. Anne Boleyn's impact, therefore, cannot be measured solely by her tumultuous life or her tragic death. It must be seen in the broader context of the historical forces she helped to set in motion. She was a catalyst for change at a time when the structures of European power, both religious and political, were beginning to crack and shift. Her legacy also invites reflection on the role of women in history. In a world where women were expected to wield influence only through obedience and subservience, Anne broke the mold. She was intelligent, outspoken, and unafraid to wield her influence over a king. She understood the nuances of court politics, used her position to advance causes she believed in, and fought to assert her own agency in a male-dominated world. For these reasons, modern audiences often view Anne as an early symbol of feminine ambition and resilience. Yet Anne's story is also a cautionary tale. Her rise to power was as swift as her fall. The very qualities that made her fascinating, her wit, her passion, her defiance, also made her dangerous in the eyes of those who thrived on conformity and control. Her tragedy lay not merely in her execution but in the realization that even a queen could be brought low by forces beyond her control. Through all these layers, Anne Boleyn remains an endlessly compelling figure. She is remembered as much for what she represents as for who she was. Her life and death highlight the volatile intersection of love, power, religion, and politics in Tudor England. They reveal the dangers of ambition and the vulnerability of women in positions of influence. And they show how, even after death, a single life can cast a long shadow over the future. It is perhaps fitting that Anne's final legacy was her daughter, a queen who would embody the very ideals of strength, wisdom, and resilience that Anne herself had displayed in her own troubled life. Elizabeth I's reign offered a vindication of sorts, a posthumous triumph for the mother who had once been vilified and destroyed by the very court her daughter would later master. Thus, the story of Anne Boleyn does not end at the scaffold on that May morning in 1536. It continues through the reign of Elizabeth, through the enduring religious and cultural shifts she helped initiate, and through the countless portrayals and reimaginings that keep her memory alive to this day. In life, Anne Boleyn changed the fate of a kingdom. In death, she became a legend that, nearly 5 centuries later, still captures the imagination of all who hear her story. Anne Boleyn's life, death, and legacy have stirred imaginations for centuries, weaving her into the fabric of literature, drama, and popular culture in ways few historical figures have achieved. Her story, at once a tale of ambition, passion, political maneuvering, and tragic downfall, has provided rich material for writers, poets, filmmakers, and audiences who find in her life a reflection of the timeless struggles for power, love, and survival. Across the centuries, Anne's depiction has evolved, her image reshaped by the concerns and ideals of each era, ensuring her place as an enduring figure in the collective consciousness. In the realm of literature, Anne Boleyn has been a constant and fascinating presence. Writers of historical novels, plays, and poetry have repeatedly turned to her story, exploring different facets of her character and her pivotal role in one of the most turbulent periods of English history. Early representations often painted her in stark terms, either as a seductive temptress who bewitched a king and brought ruin to a realm or as a martyr who suffered at the hands of a tyrant. Over time, more nuanced portrayals emerged, capturing the complexities of Anne's ambitions, intelligence, and vulnerability. Hilary Mantel's acclaimed novels, Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies, brought a new perspective to Anne's life, offering a portrayal that is at once critical and sympathetic. In Mantel's hands, Anne is sharp, politically astute, and fiercely determined, yet ultimately trapped by the very ambitions that elevate her. Mantel's work, which won multiple literary awards and captivated a broad readership, emphasized Anne's humanity, stripping away the simplistic moralizing that had colored many earlier accounts. Similarly, Philippa Gregory's novel The Other Boleyn Girl introduced a new generation of readers to Anne's story, albeit through the eyes of her sister Mary. Gregory's Anne is ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, a woman willing to manipulate and sacrifice to achieve her ends. While criticized by some historians for historical inaccuracies, Gregory's novel had an undeniable impact in revitalizing popular interest in Anne Boleyn and the Tudor court. Beyond these two major authors, countless other writers have found inspiration in Anne's story. In poetry, and has often been cast as a tragic heroine, her downfall a lament for lost innocence or a condemnation of political cruelty. In plays, she is frequently depicted as a figure who challenges authority, a woman whose rise and fall highlight the brutal dynamics of power and gender. Whether idealized or vilified, Anne's presence in English literature has served as a mirror to the changing views on women, politics, and history itself. Anne's influence extends beyond literature into the powerful visual medium of film and television. From early cinematic portrayals to lavish modern productions, Anne Boleyn has been brought to life by a succession of actresses who have interpreted her story through the lens of their times. One of the most influential depictions came in the 1969 film, Anne of the Thousand Days, starring Genevieve Bujold. Bujold's Anne was passionate, proud, and tragic, embodying the drama and pathos of Anne's meteoric rise and devastating fall. The film was widely praised and remains a classic portrayal of Anne's story. In more recent years, the television series The Tudors, featuring Natalie Dormer as Anne Boleyn, introduced Anne's story to an even broader global audience. Dormer's performance emphasized Anne's charisma, wit, and strategic brilliance, while also portraying her as a deeply emotional and ultimately vulnerable figure. The Tudors took some liberties with historical accuracy but succeeded in humanizing Anne for contemporary viewers, highlighting both her strengths and her flaws. Through vivid storytelling and compelling performances, the series reinforced Anne's enduring appeal as a complex and relatable character. Numerous other adaptations, from BBC dramas to modern reinterpretations, have continued to keep Anne's story in the public eye. Each portrayal reflects not only the historical but also the cultural preoccupations of the time. In some versions, Anne is a feminist icon, a woman who challenged the patriarchal structures of her world. In others, she is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition or the fickleness of royal favor. These diverse interpretations demonstrate how Anne's story can be molded to fit different narratives, each finding new relevance in changing times. The impact of these film and television portrayals cannot be overstated. For many people, their understanding of Anne Boleyn is shaped less by historical scholarship and more by the images and emotions conveyed on screen. The visual medium brings immediacy and intimacy to Anne's story, allowing audiences to connect with her as a real person rather than a distant historical figure. Whether in richly detailed period dramas or more stylized, imaginative retellings, Anne's life continues to captivate, inviting sympathy, admiration, and endless speculation. One of the most remarkable aspects of Anne Boleyn's enduring presence in popular culture is the continued fascination she inspires. Despite the passage of nearly 5 centuries, Anne remains a figure of intense interest, her life endlessly retold, reimagined, and reinterpreted. Part of this fascination lies in the dramatic arc of her story, the rise from relative obscurity to the heights of power, the intense love affair with Henry VIII, the bitter political intrigues, and the shocking, tragic end. It is a story filled with elements that naturally capture the human imagination: love, betrayal, ambition, triumph, and catastrophe. Yet beyond the sheer drama, Anne's life touches on deeper themes that continue to resonate. She embodies the complexities of power, especially the precarious power of women in a male-dominated world. Anne's ambitions challenged the traditional expectations for women of her time, and her downfall revealed the brutal realities faced by those who dared to step outside prescribed roles. In this way, Anne has become a symbol not just of personal tragedy but also of broader struggles for agency, recognition, and survival. Anne's enduring status also stems from her contradictions. She is simultaneously seen as a victim and a schemer, a romantic heroine and a ruthless politician, a devout believer and a cunning manipulator. These ambiguities allow each generation to project its own concerns onto Anne's story, finding in her life a reflection of contemporary debates about gender, power, morality, and identity. Whether viewed with admiration, pity, or skepticism, Anne Boleyn continues to engage, challenge, and inspire. Moreover, Anne's story is inseparable from the larger historical shifts it helped set in motion. Her marriage to Henry VIII and the birth of their daughter Elizabeth had profound consequences for English history, leading to the break with the Catholic Church, the establishment of the Church of England, and the eventual reign of one of England's greatest monarchs, Elizabeth I. These historical resonances add layers of significance to Anne's personal story, linking it to the broader narrative of religious, political, and cultural transformation. Popular culture's ongoing engagement with Anne Boleyn also reflects a deep fascination with the Tudor period itself. The court of Henry VIII, with its dazzling splendor, deadly intrigues, and larger-than-life personalities, has an enduring allure. Within this vibrant and dangerous world, Anne Boleyn stands out as one of the most compelling figures, her life encapsulating the heights of ambition and the depths of betrayal that characterized the Tudor court. In novels, films, television series, and even art, Anne serves as a vivid entry point into this rich historical tapestry. In recent years, there has been a growing effort to reclaim Anne Boleyn's story from traditional narratives that often reduced her to a villain or a victim. Scholars, writers, and artists have sought to present a more rounded, complex view of Anne, emphasizing her intelligence, her political acumen, and her role as a significant figure in the religious and cultural transformations of her time. This shift reflects broader changes in historical scholarship and cultural attitudes, highlighting a desire to move beyond simplistic portrayals and to recognize the multifaceted nature of historical figures. The continued reinterpretation of Anne's life also demonstrates the power of storytelling in shaping historical memory. Each retelling, whether in a novel, a film, or a television series, not only reflects Anne's enduring fascination but also contributes to the ongoing dialogue about who she was and what she represents. Through these stories, Anne Boleyn remains alive in the cultural imagination, her life a source of inspiration, debate, and reflection. Ultimately, Anne Boleyn's place in popular culture speaks to the timeless human interest in stories of ambition, love, betrayal, and loss. Her life offers a poignant reminder of the heights to which ambition can soar and the depths to which it can fall. It reveals the perilous intersection of personal desires and political realities, the fragile nature of power, and the enduring quest for recognition and agency. Anne's story is not just a historical account. It is a human story filled with emotions, struggles, and aspirations that continue to resonate across the centuries. As long as there are stories to be told about love and power, ambition and betrayal, Anne Boleyn will remain a central figure. Her life, her legacy, and her legend offer a window into the past and a mirror for the present, a testament to the enduring power of history and imagination to captivate, challenge, and inspire. Anne Boleyn's life remains one of the most captivating and consequential stories in English history, marked by her extraordinary rise, brief reign as queen, dramatic downfall, and enduring legacy. Her journey from the daughter of a diplomat to the Queen of England was not just a personal triumph but a catalyst for monumental changes that reshaped the religious and political fabric of England. Anne's ascent was nothing short of remarkable, particularly in a time when women had little direct power. Through intelligence, wit, and determination, she captured the heart of Henry VIII, compelling him to pursue a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, an act that ultimately led to England's break with the Roman Catholic Church. Her marriage to Henry and the birth of their daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, secured Anne's place at the center of history, even though she never produced the male heir Henry so desperately desired. Anne's reign as queen was a tumultuous period filled with intrigue, political maneuvering, and mounting pressures. Despite her initial influence over Henry and his court, her position was never secure. Political enemies and personal rivals, many of whom resented her unprecedented influence, worked tirelessly to undermine her. The failure to deliver a son, coupled with Henry's waning affection and growing interest in Jane Seymour, set the stage for Anne's downfall. Her arrest and trial were swift and brutal. She was accused of adultery, incest, and high treason, charges widely believed to have been fabricated to facilitate her removal, and faced her death with courage and dignity, maintaining her innocence to the end. Her execution on May 19, 1536, was a grim conclusion to a life that had burned so brightly. Yet Anne Boleyn's influence did not end with her death. She left behind a profound legacy that continues to echo through the centuries. Perhaps her greatest contribution to history was her daughter, Elizabeth I, who would go on to become one of England's most revered monarchs. The religious upheaval sparked by Anne's marriage to Henry VIII led to the establishment of the Church of England, setting England on a new religious path that would have far-reaching consequences for centuries to come. In this sense, Anne was not just a tragic queen but a pivotal figure in the transition from medieval to modern England. Reflecting on Anne's role in history, it is clear that she was far more than a victim of Henry's capricious desires or courtly intrigue. She was a woman who dared to reach beyond the boundaries set for her, influencing politics, religion, and culture in ways few women of her time could imagine. Her intelligence, charisma, and political acumen made her a formidable figure in a male-dominated world. Even in her downfall, Anne demonstrated remarkable resilience, facing her fate with a composure that has become legendary. Her life story serves as a reminder of the precariousness of power, the dangers of courtly life, and the high price of ambition in a ruthless political arena. The significance of Anne's life in shaping the course of history cannot be overstated. By becoming the catalyst for England's break with the Catholic Church, she helped lay the groundwork for the English Reformation, a movement that would eventually lead to greater religious diversity and the emergence of Protestantism as a dominant force in English and European life. Her legacy also includes the cultural flowering that occurred during the reign of her daughter, Elizabeth I, known as the Elizabethan era, a golden age of English literature, exploration, and national identity. In this way, Anne's influence reaches far beyond her own lifetime, touching countless aspects of English and world history. Anne Boleyn's story offers many moral lessons that remain relevant today. Her life illustrates the complex interplay of ambition, love, betrayal, and political intrigue. Anne's ambition propelled her to the highest position a woman could achieve in her time, but it also made her a target for those who resented her influence. Her love for Henry VIII, and perhaps even more her vision for herself and her family, inspired her to reach for a crown that would ultimately cost her her life. The betrayal she suffered, from Henry, from former allies, and from the very court she once commanded, highlight the precarious nature of loyalty and trust in the pursuit of power. And her tragic end serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can arise from political machinations and personal vendettas. In examining Anne's life, we are also confronted with timeless themes of gender and power. Anne operated within a rigidly patriarchal society that sought to limit women's roles to that of subservient wives and mothers. Yet she managed to carve out a position of influence, challenging traditional gender norms and asserting her own agency. Her story forces us to reconsider the historical narratives that have often portrayed women as passive figures, reminding us that women have always played active, if sometimes invisible, roles in shaping the course of history. In this sense, Anne's life speaks to modern discussions about gender equality, female ambition, and the ways in which women's contributions have been recorded or erased through history. The continued relevance of Anne Boleyn in modern culture is testament to her extraordinary legacy. She remains a symbol of ambition, intelligence, and resilience, qualities that resonate strongly in contemporary discussions about women's roles in society. Her story has been retold countless times in literature, film, television, and art, each generation finding new meanings and inspirations in her life. Whether as a tragic heroine, a shrewd political player, or a misunderstood victim, Anne Boleyn continues to captivate the imagination of people around the world. Moreover, Anne's life challenges us to think critically about the nature of historical memory and the ways in which history is constructed. The conflicting portrayals of Anne, as saint or sinner, victim or villain, highlight the subjective nature of historical narratives and the importance of questioning whose stories are told and why. Her life invites us to explore the intersection of personal ambition and public duty, love and power, faith and pragmatism. Anne Boleyn's story is not just a relic of the past but a living narrative that continues to inspire, provoke, and educate. Her rise, reign, and fall offer a window into the human experience, revealing the enduring struggles for power, recognition, and agency that define societies across time and place. Through her courage, her vision, and even her tragic end, Anne Boleyn reminds us of the profound impact one individual can have on the course of history, and the enduring power of a legacy forged in both triumph and tragedy.